I came back from my father's funeral with a secret, burning a hole in my pocket. A single piece of paper worth $14.2 million. I was standing on the front porch ready to open the door and change my son's life forever. I was ready to tell him that our days of struggle were over. But then I heard his wife's voice coming through the thin wood of the door. And what I heard next did not just break my heart. It froze the blood in my veins. If you have ever been betrayed by the people you sacrificed your entire life for, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found out your own family was planning to throw you away like yesterday's garbage? Because that is exactly what was happening to me. My name is Hank Patterson. I am 70 years old. For 45 of those years, I worked as a heavy equipment mechanic. My hands are permanently stained with grease and oil. My back is bent from crawling under excavators and bulldozers in the freezing rain and the scorching sun. I did it all for my family. I did it so my son Brandon would never have to touch a wrench if he did not want to. The taxi dropped me off at the curb. It was a gray, drizzly afternoon in Seattle, the kind of rain that chills you to the bone. I paid the driver with crumpled bills, the last of the cash in my wallet. He looked at me with pity. He saw an old man in a cheap, ill-fitting black suit and worn-out work boots. He had no idea that the man standing in front of him was now richer than anyone in this entire neighborhood. I walked up the driveway slowly. My knees were aching. They always ached when it rained. But today the pain felt different. It felt lighter. Because inside my jacket pocket was the probate court document I had received just 4 hours ago. My father. A man I had not spoken to in 20 years. A man I thought was a broke farmer in North Dakota. He had passed away last week. I went to the funeral out of duty expecting nothing but a bill for the burial. Instead, the executor of his estate handed me a thick envelope. I stopped halfway up the driveway and pulled the paper out one last time just to make sure I was not hallucinating. There it was. Farm number 1 in North Dakota, 1,200 acres of prime land with wind turbines. Farm number 2 in Montana, a cattle ranch with 500 head of Black Angus. Farm number 3, a vineyard in Oregon with a long-term purchase contract. And a beach house in Malibu. Total estimated value $14.2 million. I stared at the numbers. The zeros seemed to dance on the page. 14 million. I looked up at the house in front of me. It was a nice suburban house. 2 stories, a manicured lawn. I bought this house. I sold my own home, the one I lived in with my late wife Martha, to pay for the down payment on this place for Brandon and Tiffany when they got married. I moved into the damp, windowless basement so they could have the master bedroom. I thought that is what fathers do. We sacrifice. We give. But lately, the atmosphere in the house had changed. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, had stopped making eye contact. Brandon, my son, always looked nervous. I thought it was just stress. I thought this money would fix everything. I folded the document. A sudden instinct, a habit from years of working on job sites where things went missing, kicked in. I did not put the paper back in my pocket. Instead, I sat down on the wet concrete steps of the porch. I unlaced my left work boot. It was an old Red Wing boot, scuffed and scarred. I lifted the insole and slid the folded wheel underneath it. Then I laced the boot back up tight. I wanted to surprise them. I wanted to see the relief on Brandon's face. I stood up and reached for the door handle. That is when I heard it. The voice was high-pitched and sharp. It was Tiffany. She was not whispering. She was shouting. God. Brandon, the smell is everywhere. It is like living in a garage. I cannot take it anymore. My hand froze on the doorknob. Then I heard my son's voice. It was soft, weak. Tiffany, please. He just got back from his dad's funeral. He is grieving. I leaned closer to the door. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I do not care if he is grieving, Brandon Tiffany yelled. Her voice cut through the door like a knife. He is useless. He just sits there in the basement coughing and watching TV. I have clients coming over next week. I want to turn that basement into my yoga studio. I cannot do that with a 70-year-old mechanic living down there. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Useless. That is what she called me. But where can he go? Brandon asked. His voice was trembling. He gave us all his money for this house. He has nothing left. That is his problem, not ours, Tiffany snapped. Look at our bills, Brandon. Your crypto account is zero. My credit cards are maxed out. We are drowning. We need to cut the dead weight. Dead weight. I stood there paralyzed. I remembered the day Brandon was born. I remembered holding him in the hospital, promising him I would always protect him. I remembered working double shifts for 3 years straight to pay for his college tuition so he would not have student loans. Put him in a home, Tiffany said. Her tone was dismissive, cold. We cannot afford a private home, Brandon said. Then put him in a state facility, one of those government-funded ones, or just drop him off at a shelter. I do not care. Just get him out. There was a silence. A long, heavy silence. I prayed, I begged silently for my son to stand up. I waited for him to say, "No, Tiffany. That is my father. He sacrificed everything for us. I will never abandon him." I pressed my ear against the cold wood, holding my breath. Finally, Brandon spoke. Okay. Just one word. Okay. My knees gave out. I stumbled back and grabbed the porch railing to keep from falling. The world spun around me. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rain. It was the sheer force of the betrayal. My son, my own flesh and blood, had just agreed to throw me away, to put me in a state shelter, to discard me like a broken tool that could no longer be fixed. Tiffany's voice came again, triumphant now. Good. Tell him tonight. Give him a deadline. If he is not gone by Friday, I am filing for divorce, Brandon. And you know I will get full custody of the kids. I slowly backed away from the door. Every step felt like I was walking through deep mud. I looked down at my boots. Underneath my left foot was $14.2 million. Enough to buy this entire street. Enough to solve every problem they ever had. 10 minutes ago, I was going to walk in there and hand it to them. I was going to pay off their debts. I was going to buy Tiffany her yoga studio. I was going to set up trust funds for my grandchildren. But now I sat down on the bench on the porch. The rain soaked into my suit, but I didn't feel it. I felt nothing but a cold, hard rage beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. They thought I was helpless. They thought I was senile. They thought I was just a broke old man with nothing to offer but a cough and the smell of oil. I wiped the rain from my face. It was mixed with tears, but I brushed them away angrily. No. I would not cry for them. If they wanted a poor, helpless old man, then that is exactly what I would give them. I would play the role. I would let them think they had all the power. I would let them show me exactly who they really were. I stood up. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the damp air. I adjusted my jacket. I made my shoulders slump. I practiced a tremor in my hands. I reached for the door handle again. This time I didn't open it as a savior. I opened it as a spy. The game had begun, and they didn't even know the rules. I pushed the door open and stepped into the warmth of the hallway. Brandon, Tiffany. I called out, making my voice sound weak and raspy. I'm home. I saw them emerge from the kitchen. Tiffany put on a fake, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Brandon couldn't even look at me. Welcome back, Hank, Tiffany said. We need to talk. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who wanted to throw me under a bridge, and I smiled back. a tired, sad old man's smile. Yes, I said. We certainly do. I hung my wet coat on the rack in the hallway. The water dripped onto the hardwood floor, creating a small, dark puddle. I stared at it for a moment, listening to the silence of the house. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. My son and his wife were just a few feet away in the dining room, but no one came to greet me. No one asked how the funeral was. No one asked if I was okay after burying the man who raised me. I wiped my face with my handkerchief, composing myself. I had to remember the plan. I was not Hank Patterson, the millionaire owner of 3 farms. I was Hank, the broke burden of a father. I hunched my shoulders forward, letting my posture collapse just enough to look defeated. I walked into the dining room. The smell hit me first. Rosemary, garlic, and seared beef. It was a rich, mouth-watering aroma that instantly made my empty stomach growl. They were sitting at the mahogany table, the one I had paid for as a housewarming gift 4 years ago. Brandon was cutting into a thick, juicy ribeye steak. The pink juice ran out onto his white porcelain plate. Tiffany had a glass of red wine in one hand, swirling it absent-mindedly while she scrolled through her phone with the other. They did not look up when I pulled out my chair. The wooden legs scraped against the floor, a loud, harsh sound that made Brandon flinch, but he still refused to meet my eyes. There was no steak on my placemat. There was no wine glass. Instead, sitting in front of my seat was a small chipped bowl. Inside was a lump of leftover lasagna from 2 nights ago. It had been microwaved, the cheese rubbery, and the sauce separated into orange oil around the edges. It was lukewarm. I looked at the steak on Brandon's plate. I looked at the cold leftovers in my bowl. The contrast was not just an insult. It was a statement. I sat down slowly, letting out a heavy theatrical sigh. I picked up my fork, my hand trembling slightly, not from age, but from the sheer effort of holding back my rage. So I said, my voice raspy. No one wants to know about the service. Tiffany finally looked up. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy. She took a sip of her wine, leaving a red stain on her lips. We assumed it went fine, Hank. It is a funeral. They are all the same. Sad music, old people crying. Did you wipe your feet? You smell like wet dog. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It was a nice service, I said quietly. Quiet. Just how he would have wanted it. Brandon cut another piece of steak. I saw his hand shaking just a little. He knew this was wrong. He knew treating his father this way was a sin. But he was too terrified of the woman sitting across from him to say a word. He just chewed, his eyes fixed on his meat, as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. Tiffany set her wine glass down. The sound of the glass hitting the table echoed in the room. We need to talk about the living situation, Hank, she said. Her voice was casual, like she was discussing the weather or a grocery list. I looked at her, feigning confusion. The living situation, I asked. Yes. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. This arrangement. It is not working for us anymore. We have been talking, and we have decided we need to reclaim the basement. Reclaim, I repeated. I need a space for my wellness journey, she continued, waving a hand vaguely. A home gym, a yoga studio, somewhere I can focus on my mental health. And having you down there coughing and shuffling around, it disrupts the energy of the house. It is toxic for my vibrations. I looked at Brandon. Please, son. Look at me. Brandon, I said. You need a gym more than you need your father. He finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and watery. He looked like a trapped animal. Dad. It is not just the gym, he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. It is stressful. We just need space. Tiffany cut him off, her voice sharp. Stop beating around the bush, Brandon. Hank, here is the deal. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. The fork dropped from my hand, and clattered into the bowl of cold pasta. I stared at them, letting my jaw drop open. 48 hours, I stammered. But where am I supposed to go? I have no money. I have no car. That is not really our problem, is it? Tiffany said, picking up her knife and fork. There are shelters downtown. Or maybe one of your old mechanic buddies has a couch. You are a resourceful man. You will figure it out. I felt a fire igniting in my chest, hot and fierce. I thought about the document hidden in my boot. I thought about the $14 million. But I tamped it down. Not yet. I needed them to say it. I needed to hear the full extent of their ungratefulness. I gripped the edge of the table. How can you do this? I asked, my voice rising just enough to sound desperate. 3 years ago, I sold my house on Elm Street. My home. The home where your mother and I raised you, Brandon. I sold it for $300,000. I looked directly at Tiffany. I gave you every single penny of that sale, I said. I handed you a check for $300,000 so you could put a down payment on this house. This house that you are now kicking me out of. We had an agreement. You said I would always have a place here. You promised. Tiffany laughed. It was a short, dry sound. Oh, Hank, you are rewriting history. I am what? That money, she said, pointing her steak knife at me, was a gift. It was a wedding gift. Nowhere on that check did it say loan. Nowhere did we sign a contract saying you get to live in our basement rent-free until you die. I looked at Brandon again. Son, you know the truth. You know I gave up my retirement security for you. Brandon looked at his wife. Then he looked at his plate. It was a gift, Dad, he whispered. The betrayal hit me harder than a physical blow. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I sat up with when he had fevers, was rewriting our history to please his wife. He was erasing my sacrifice. So that is it, I asked, my voice trembling for real now. I am just trash to you. I am squeezed dry. You took my money. You took my house, and now that I have nothing left to give, I am just waste. Tiffany sighed, looking bored. Do not be dramatic, Hank. It is just economics. You are a drain on our resources. You do not contribute. You do not pay rent. You are just a mouth to feed. And frankly, you have outlived your usefulness. Outlived my usefulness. The words hung in the air. I looked at the half-eaten steak on Brandon's plate. I looked at the cold pasta in front of me. I realized then that there was no saving this. There was no misunderstanding. This was pure, unadulterated greed and cruelty. I slowly pushed my chair back. I needed to leave the table before I lost control and punched the wall. I needed to get to the safety of the basement to plan my next move. I stood up, making sure to lean heavily on the table, acting like my legs were too weak to support me. Okay, I whispered. Okay. I will start packing. Good, Tiffany said, already turning her attention back to her phone. Make sure you take all those old boxes of magazines. I do not want to have to hire a junk removal service after you are gone. I turned away from them. I walked toward the basement door, my head bowed low. Behind me, I heard the clinking of silverware resume. They went right back to eating their steak as if they hadn't just destroyed a man's life. As I opened the door to the dark, musty basement, a cold smile touched my lips where they couldn't see. Outlived my usefulness, I thought. Oh, Tiffany, you have no idea just how useful I am about to become. I closed the door behind me and descended into the dark. The game was on. And they had just made their first and biggest mistake. They thought they had broken me, but all they had done was free me. Chào bạn tôi là Cường Gia Trăng. Tôi đã nắm rõ yêu cầu. Tiếp nối mạch cảm xúc căng thẳng từ bữa tối định mệnh. Đây là phân cảnh bà môi như $25,000. Tôi sẽ viết bằng tiếng Anh chuẩn, giống kẻ narrative voice, tập trung sâu vào diễn biến tâm lý và hành động, đảm bảo độ dài. và sự liên mạch tuyệt đối không chứa tiêu đề hay định dạng gây nhiều cho ai đọc. The next morning came too early. The basement was cold and damp, smelling of mildew and neglect. I had barely slept, my mind racing with the image of my son's averted eyes and his wife's cruel smile. But when the sun began to filter through the small high window, I knew it was time to put my plan into motion. I dragged my old battered suitcase out from under the cot. It was the same suitcase I had used for 40 years, covered in scratches and stickers from job sites across the country. I started packing slowly. I did not have much. A few flannel shirts worn thin at the elbows, 2 pairs of work trousers stained with grease that no amount of washing could remove, my shaving kit, a framed photograph of my late wife, Martha. As I placed the photo in the suitcase, I ran my thumb over her face. I whispered a silent apology to her. I was sorry that the son we raised with so much love had turned into a stranger. But I also made her a promise. I promised that I would not let them destroy the dignity she had always admired in me. I heard the basement door creak open at the top of the stairs. Heavy footsteps descended. It was Tiffany. She was dressed in an expensive silk robe holding a steaming mug of coffee. She did not offer to help. She did not ask if I needed boxes. She just stood on the bottom step, leaning against the railing, watching me like a prison guard, watching an inmate clear out his cell. She was there to make sure I did not steal anything. She was there to make sure I did not take a single towel or a spare light bulb that she considered hers. "You need to hurry up, Hank," she said, blowing on her coffee. "The contractors are coming tomorrow to measure the floor for the gym. I want this place empty by tonight." I nodded, keeping my head down. I folded a shirt with deliberate slowness. My hands were shaking, but this time I did not have to pretend. The rage was vibrating through my fingertips. "I will be out of your hair soon," I said, my voice thick with feigned sadness. "I just need to figure out where to go. The shelters are full this time of year." Tiffany shrugged. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes scanning the room with disdain. "That is really not my concern anymore, Hank. You are a grown man. Figure it out." I zipped up the suitcase. The sound was loud and harsh in the quiet room. I stood up and patted the pocket of my flannel shirt. I took a deep breath. It was time to cast the line and see if the fish would bite. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a check. It was a cashier's check I had drawn from my own dwindling savings account weeks ago, the last of my emergency fund. But to them, it would be something else entirely. It was crumpled and stained, looking like something an old man had carried around for too long. I hesitated, holding the piece of paper in my trembling hand. I looked at Tiffany, making sure she saw it. I forgot to mention something," I stammered, looking at the check with longing. Tiffany's eyes narrowed. She saw the paper. She saw the bank logo. Her posture shifted instantly. She stood up straighter. "What is that?" she asked, her voice sharp. I sighed, looking down at the floor. "It is nothing, really. Just... Well, before I came back, I managed to sell your grandfather's old truck. You know that 1978 Ford F-150 he kept in the barn?" Tiffany scoffed. "That pile of rust, who would buy that?" "A collector, moon." I lied smoothly. "A man from the city. He loves restoring vintage trucks. He gave me a good price for it." I unfolded the check, slowly revealing the numbers. $25,000. I held it up just enough for her to see the amount. $25,000, I mumbled. I was going to use it to rent a small room at a motel. Maybe put a deposit down on an apartment, if they will take an old man with no credit. It should last me a year or two if I am careful with food. The reaction was instantaneous. It was like watching a predator smell blood. Tiffany's eyes widened. The boredom vanished from her face, replaced by a hungry, predatory gleam. She almost dropped her coffee mug. She took a step off the stairs, moving toward me. $25,000, she repeated. Her voice was no longer cold. It was breathless. I nodded. I started to put the check back in my pocket. Yes. Well, I better get going. I do not want to hold up your gym renovation. Wait, Tiffany practically shouted. She rushed forward, closing the distance between us. She reached out and put a hand on my arm. Her touch was warm, gentle, fake. It made my skin crawl. Hank, wait a minute. Let us not be hasty. I looked at her, widening my eyes in innocent confusion. But you said I had to leave. You said I was toxic for your vibrations. Oh, Daddy, she said, actually using the word daddy. I was just stressed. You know how I get. I did not mean it. We are family. Family does not kick family out. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. 30 seconds ago, I was trash. Now, with $25,000 in my hand, I was daddy. But the contractors, I asked. The yoga studio. We can wait, she said quickly, her eyes darting to the check in my hand. We can push the renovations back. Or maybe we can find a way to make the basement work for both of us. You should not be out on the street with that kind of money. It is dangerous. People prey on seniors, Hank. You could get robbed. You could lose it. She was standing so close now I could smell her expensive perfume. It smelled like greed. I do not know, Tiffany, I said, clutching the check tighter. I really need this money to survive. Exactly, she said. And that is why you should stay here, with us, where you are safe. She reached out and gently pried the check from my fingers. I let her take it. I needed her to take it. Here is what we will do, she said, her voice smooth like syrup. I will deposit this into our joint account for safekeeping, just so it is secure. We can use it to upgrade the house for you, maybe get you a better bed. And you can stay here as long as you like. We will take care of everything. You will not have to spend a dime. I watched her fold the check and slide it into the pocket of her silk robe. She patted the pocket, a satisfied smirk touching her lips. Are you sure? I asked. I do not want to be a burden. Oh, hush, she said, waving a hand. You are never a burden. Now why don't you unpack that suitcase? I will go tell Brandon the good news. He will be so relieved you are staying. She turned and practically ran up the stairs. I heard her footsteps hurrying down the hallway toward the bedroom. I heard her voice, high and excited, shouting for Brandon. I stood there in the silence of the basement. The check was gone. My life savings were gone. But I had bought myself something far more valuable than money. I had bought myself time. I sat down on the edge of the cot. The mask of the confused old man dropped from my face. My eyes hardened. $25,000. That was all it took. That was the price of their love. That was the price of a roof over my head. But something did not add up. They lived in an $800,000 house. They drove luxury cars. Tiffany carried handbags that cost $3,000 each. Why were they so desperate for $25,000? Why did she react as if that check was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman? Rich people do not panic over 25 grand. Desperate people do. I looked at the ceiling, listening to them celebrating upstairs. I could hear Tiffany laughing. It was the laugh of someone who had just pulled off a heist. They thought they had just scammed a senile old man. They thought they had secured their next month of luxury. I reached into my boot and felt the thick probate document still hidden there. 14.2 million. They had settled for crumbs when they could have had the whole bakery. But now I knew. There was a hole in their finances, a deep, dark hole that they were trying to fill, and I was going to find out exactly how deep it went. I stood up and walked to the corner of the room where the old bookshelf stood. I pulled out a small hidden toolkit from behind a row of dusty encyclopedias. I selected a lockpick tension wrench and a rake pick. I waited. I waited until I heard the garage door open and their car back out of the driveway. They were going to the bank. They were going to cash that check immediately. They wouldn't wait an hour. As soon as the house was silent, I moved. I walked up the stairs, my steps silent and steady. I was not going to unpack. I was going to investigate. I headed straight for the one room they always kept locked. Brandon's home office. The lock was cheap, a standard residential privacy lock. It took me less than 10 seconds to pop it open. I stepped inside. The room smelled of stale air and secrets. Papers were scattered everywhere. It was chaos. And right there in the center of the desk was a stack of envelopes with red stamps. I sat down in Brandon's expensive leather chair. I picked up the first envelope. It was time to see just how much trouble my ungrateful children were really in. Chào ban tôi là Cuong Da Trang. Tôi đã nắm rõ yêu cầu. Đây là phân cảnh 4 cuộc điều tra trong bóng tối. Tôi sẽ viết tiếp mạch truyện với dòng kể tiếng Anh, liền mạch không ngắt quãng tập trung sâu vào hành động và sự thay đổi tâm lý của Hank khi khám phá ra sự thật trần trụi. Các số liệu tài chính và chi tiết về kỹ năng thợ máy sẽ được lồng ghép tự nhiên để tạo tính chân thực. The house was quiet again. A heavy, expensive silence that felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. My $25,000 check had bought me a temporary truce. It had bought me a week, 7 days to sleep in the basement without being threatened with eviction. But I knew better than to relax. I knew that money was like blood in the water for sharks, and my son and his wife were circling. I waited until I heard the distinct sound of the garage door closing. They had left for brunch. Tiffany had walked out the door an hour ago wearing a new pair of designer sunglasses and carrying a handbag that looked like it cost more than my first car. She was smiling. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery, not a woman who had just taken her father-in-law's life savings. She hadn't gone to the bank to pay off debt. She had gone to the mall. As soon as the car engine faded down the street, I moved. I didn't walk like an old man anymore. I walked with the purpose of a mechanic approaching a broken engine. I went straight upstairs to the second floor. The door to Brandon's home office was closed but not locked this time. They were getting careless. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was downstairs, watching daytime television, grateful for the crumbs they threw him. I stepped inside. The room was a mess. It smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Piles of unopened mail were shoved into corners. I sat down in Brandon's leather chair. It squeaked under my weight. I looked at the desk. The top drawer was locked. I didn't panic. I didn't look for a key. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, thin piece of metal I had fashioned from a wiper blade spring in the garage. I spent 45 years fixing heavy machinery. I have opened rusted engine blocks in the middle of snowstorms. A cheap residential desk lock was a joke to me. I inserted the tool. I applied a little tension with my thumb. I felt the pins set. 1, 2, 3. Click. The drawer slid open. I was expecting bad news, but I was not expecting a catastrophe. The first thing I saw was the color red. It was everywhere. Every single envelope seemed to have a stamp that screamed final notice or past due. I picked up the stack of credit card statements. My hands, usually steady enough to calibrate a fuel injector, started to shake. I opened the first one. An American Express black card in Tiffany's name. Balance due $32,000. Minimum payment missed. I opened the next one. A Visa card in Brandon's name. Balance due $52,300. I did the math in my head instantly. $84,300 in credit card debt alone. $84,000. They were wearing my money. They were eating my money. That $25,000 check I gave them, it wouldn't even cover the interest payments for a few months. I dug deeper into the drawer. I found a folder labeled Investments. I opened it hoping to find anything that showed responsibility. Instead, I found a graveyard of bad decisions. My son had bet everything on crypto. I saw the transaction logs. He had bought in at the peak. Luna, FTX. Names I had heard on the news associated with disaster. He had poured money into them like he was feeding a furnace. I traced the columns down to the bottom line. Loss. 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 $150,000. Gone. Vaporized into the digital ether. That was the money for his son's college fund. That was the equity from the house I helped them buy. He had gambled it all away while trying to play the big shot investor. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced myself to keep looking. There was a thick envelope at the bottom of the stack. It looked official. It looked legal. I pulled it out. The return address was the bank that held the mortgage on this house. I opened it. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. They hadn't paid the mortgage in 6 months. 6 months. The bank was giving them 30 days to pay the arrears or the sheriff would be coming to put a padlock on the door. I sat back, the paper trembling in my hand. They were not just broke. They were drowning. They were destitute. The luxury car in the driveway was leased. The furniture was likely bought on credit. This entire life, this facade of success they rubbed in my face was a lie. It was a house of cards waiting for a breeze to knock it over. And then I realized why they were so desperate to get rid of me. Or rather, why they were so desperate to control me. If the house was foreclosed on, they would have nowhere to go. They needed a lifeline. And they thought I was a dry well, until I found the last piece of the puzzle. It was not a bill. It was an email printout tucked inside a folder from a law firm I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Guardianship Petition Strategy." I began to read, and my blood turned to ice. The email was from a lawyer named Alvarez. It outlined a plan to declare Henry Patterson, that is me, mentally incapacitated due to advanced dementia. It detailed how they could use my confusion, which they were manufacturing with those sedatives in my tea, as evidence. Once granted guardianship, the email explained Brandon and Tiffany would have full legal control over my monthly Social Security checks, my veteran benefits, and any other assets I might have hidden. They did not just want to kick me out. They wanted to enslave me. They wanted to strip me of my rights, lock me away in a state facility, and siphon off my meager pension to pay for their mistakes, to pay for Tiffany's handbags, to pay for Brandon's gambling losses. I looked at the date on the email. It was sent 3 days before my father's funeral. They had been planning this while I was mourning. I carefully placed the papers back into the drawer. I arranged them exactly as I had found them. I locked the drawer again. Click. I stood up. I felt heavy. The weight of the betrayal was crushing. But beneath the pain there was something else. A cold, hard resolve. They wanted a senile old man, fine. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. They wanted to play legal games. They had no idea I was holding a royal flush in my boot. I walked out of the office and down the stairs. I went back to the basement. I sat on my cot and stared at the wall. I was not Hank the victim anymore. I was Hank the mechanic. And I had just diagnosed the problem. The engine of this family was rotten to the core. There was no fixing it. There was only one thing left to do. It was time to scrap it. I pulled out my phone, a cheap burner I had bought with cash at the airport, and dialed a number I had memorized from my father's will. "Harrison," I said when the voice answered. "It is Hank. We need to talk. And bring the paperwork, all of it." I sat in the basement for hours, staring at the concrete wall until my eyes burned. The knowledge of what I had found in Brandon's office sat heavy in my stomach like a stone I had swallowed whole. They were not just bad with money. They were criminals in the making. They were plotting to steal my life, my freedom, and my sanity, just to keep their house of cards from collapsing. I knew I had to be careful. If I showed even a hint of aggression, if I let slip that I knew about the foreclosure or the guardianship petition, they would accelerate their plans. They might not wait for a doctor. They might just push me down the stairs and claim I fell. I needed to be invisible. I needed to be the confused, harmless old man they so desperately wanted me to be. Dinner that night was different. The hostility from the night before had vanished, replaced by an unsettling, artificial warmth. Tiffany had ordered pizza, my favorite kind, with pepperoni and extra cheese. She smiled when I came up to the kitchen. It was the smile of a nurse in a psychiatric ward patient and condescending. "Sit down, Dad," she said, pulling out my chair. "You look exhausted. Is your memory bothering you again today?" I sat down slowly, letting my hands tremble on the table. A little, I lied. I felt a bit dizzy earlier. I thought I saw... Well, never mind. Tiffany exchanged a quick, meaningful glance with Brandon. I saw it. I saw the spark of satisfaction in her eyes. I was playing my part perfectly. After we ate, Brandon went to the living room to watch sports. He still couldn't look me in the eye. Guilt was eating him alive, but cowardice was keeping him silent. Tiffany, however, busied herself in the kitchen. I heard the kettle whistling. I heard the clinking of a spoon against a ceramic mug. The sounds were domestic normal, but to my heightened senses, they sounded like the preparation of a weapon. She walked into the living room carrying a steaming mug. The aroma was strong, overpowering the smell of the pizza. It smelled like peppermint and chamomile, but underneath that, there was a chemical bitterness that made my nose twitch. "Here you go, Hank," she said, placing the mug in my hands. "I made you a special blend. It is an herbal tea I got from my wellness coach. It is supposed to be excellent for cognitive function and memory." I looked down at the dark liquid. The steam rose up, clouding my glasses. "Thank you, Tiffany," I said, my voice wavering. "That is very thoughtful of you." "Drink it while it is hot," she urged, standing over me. She did not move. She stood there with her arms crossed, watching me with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She was waiting to see the liquid go down my throat. I lifted the cup to my lips. My hand shook, spilling a few drops onto my lap. "Careful," she said softly. I tilted the cup. I let the hot liquid touch my lips. I let a small amount enter my mouth, holding it under my tongue. It tasted foul, metallic, artificial. I made a swallowing motion with my throat, a trick I had learned years ago to avoid taking medicine I hated. Then I lowered the cup, letting out a satisfied sigh. "Is it good?" she asked. "It is. Strong," I said. "Keep drinking. You need to finish it all for it to work." I took another fake sip, holding more of the bitter poison in my mouth. Then I saw my opportunity. Brandon shouted at the TV as his team scored a touchdown. Tiffany turned her head for a split second to look at the screen. In that second, I brought my handkerchief up to my mouth, pretending to wipe a spill from my chin. I spat the liquid into the thick fabric. I did it quickly, seamlessly, a sleight of hand born of necessity. I balled the handkerchief up in my fist and shoved it deep into my pocket. I repeated this dance 3 more times. Sip, distract, spit. By the time I set the mug down, it was empty. "Good job, Hank," Tiffany said, looking at the empty cup with a triumphant smile. "You should feel much more relaxed soon. Why don't you go downstairs and get some rest? You have had a big day." I nodded, acting as if my eyelids were already growing heavy. "I think I will," I mumbled. "I feel very sleepy all of a sudden." "Perfect," she whispered. I stumbled toward the basement door, gripping the railing as if I might fall. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I rushed to the small bathroom in the basement and rinsed my mouth out with cold water, scrubbing my tongue to remove any trace of the drug. I did not know what it was, but I knew I could not let even a drop of it stay in my system. I did not sleep. I could not sleep. I sat in the dark on my cot, staring at the ceiling, listening. I waited for the house to settle. I waited for the silence. At around 1 in the morning, I heard footsteps overhead. They were in the kitchen directly above me. The floorboards were thin. If I stood on my chair and pressed my ear against the ventilation duct, I could hear them clearly. I climbed up, balancing precariously on the wobbly chair. The voices drifted down, muffled but intelligible. Did he drink it all? It was Brandon's voice. He sounded anxious. Every drop, Tiffany replied. Her voice was calm, clinical. It is a high dose, Brandon, 3 times the normal amount. Is it safe? Brandon asked. I mean, we do not want to kill him. Do not be stupid. It is just a sedative mixed with a mild hallucinogen. It will not kill him. But for the next 72 hours, his brain is going to be mush. He will be slurring his words, forgetting his name, maybe even seeing things that aren't there. I gripped the metal ductwork, my knuckles turning white. Why do we need him like that for 3 days? Brandon asked. Because Dr. Reynolds is coming on Friday morning, Tiffany explained, as if speaking to a child. I spoke to him today. He is willing to sign the competency evaluation, but he needs to see symptoms. If Hank is sitting there acting normal, Reynolds cannot sign the paper. But if Hank is drooling and talking to his dead wife, then it is a slam dunk. Diagnosis confirmed. Advanced dementia. Immediate guardianship granted. I closed my eyes. Friday. That was 2 days away. They were going to keep me drugged for 2 days straight, so they could present me as a vegetable to a corrupt doctor. And once we have the guardianship, Brandon asked, then we control everything. Tiffany said. The Social Security checks coming in. The veteran benefits. And that money he put in our account. We can legally access it without him asking questions. We pay off the mortgage arrears immediately. We stop the foreclosure. We save the house. But what about him? Brandon asked. What do we do with him after? We find a facility, Tiffany said. A state-run one. Somewhere cheap. We drop him off, sign the papers, and visit him once a year at Christmas. He will be safe, Brandon. He will have a bed and 3 meals a day. It is better than he deserves after holding out on us. There was a pause. I waited for my son to object. I waited for him to say that this was evil, that this was a crime, that I was his father. Instead, I heard the clink of glass. Pour me another drink, Brandon said. I just want this to be over. Me too, baby, me too. Just stick to the plan. Keep him confused. Keep him drugged. By Friday afternoon, we will be free. I climbed down from the chair. My legs were shaking, but this time it wasn't from age or fear. It was from a cold, quiet fury. I sat on the edge of my bed. The air in the basement felt freezing, but the chill was coming from inside me. This was no longer a family dispute. This was no longer about money or a house or a wedding gift. This was a conspiracy. This was a calculated predatory attack on my life. They were willing to chemically lobotomize me to pay for their lifestyle. They were willing to erase who I was, Henry Patterson, master mechanic, husband, father, and replace me with a legal file labeled incapacitated. I touched the pocket where I kept my phone. I touched the boot where I kept the will. They wanted a show on Friday. They wanted to see a man who had lost his mind. I would give them a show, but it would not be the one they expected. I lay back on the cot, staring into the darkness. I would have to pretend. I would have to act like the drugs were working. I would have to let them think they were winning right up until the moment I tightened the noose they had woven for themselves. Friday, I whispered to the empty room. I will see you on Friday, Dr. Reynolds, and I will be ready. The sun came up on Friday morning, casting a pale, unforgiving light into the basement. I had spent the night mentally rehearsing every movement, every stutter, every vacant stare. Today was the dress rehearsal for my own demise, and I had to make sure the audience bought a ticket. I pulled on my trousers deliberately, leaving the button undone and the zipper half down. I ruffled my gray hair until it stood up in wild tufts. I took out my dentures and slipped them into my pocket, letting my cheeks sink in and my jaw go slack. When I looked in the small cracked mirror above the sink, I did not see Hank the mechanic. I saw a ghost. I saw the shell of a man that Tiffany so desperately wanted me to be. I shuffled up the stairs. I made sure my feet dragged heavily on each wooden step, creating a slow, rhythmic thud that announced my arrival. I opened the door to the kitchen. They were already there. Tiffany was drinking a green smoothie, her phone in her hand as always. Brandon was staring into his coffee mug, looking like a man on death row. I stood in the doorway and let my head loll to the side. I let a little bit of drool gather at the corner of my mouth. I blinked slowly, as if the light hurt my eyes. "Who is there?" I croaked. My voice was thin and reedy. Tiffany's head snapped up. Her eyes lit up with a terrifying excitement. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not rush to help me. She tapped the screen of her phone and held it up, the red recording light blinking. "Good morning, Hank," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "How are we feeling today?" I took a stumbling step forward, grabbing the back of a chair to steady myself. I knocked over a salt shaker. It crashed to the floor and shattered. I do not know," I mumbled. "Where is Martha?" She said she was making pancakes. I saw Brandon flinch. He gripped his coffee mug so hard his knuckles turned white. He knew his mother had been dead for 5 years. He knew that asking for her was a sign that I was gone. "Mom is not here, Dad," Brandon said, his voice cracking. I looked at him. This was the moment. The knife twist. I squinted my eyes, leaning forward as if trying to recognize a stranger in the fog. "Arthur," I asked, using my father's name. "Arthur, is that you? Did you fix the tractor? The south field needs plowing before the rain comes." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Brandon looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at me with a mixture of horror and profound sadness. For a split second, I saw the boy I used to know. The boy who cried when his goldfish died. The boy who had a heart. I saw him wanting to stand up, to rush over and hold me, to tell me that I was Hank, his father, and that everything was going to be all right. But then Tiffany laughed. It was a soft, cruel sound. "Did you hear that, Brandon?" She whispered, panning the phone camera from my confused face to his devastated one. "He thinks you are his dead father. He is talking about a tractor that hasn't existed in 40 years. This is perfect. This is exactly what Dr. Reynolds needs to see." She moved closer to me, shoving the phone right in my face. "Hank, look at me. Do you know who I am?" I stared at the lens. I made my eyes go wide and fearful. Are you the nurse?" I asked, trembling. "I want to go home. Please, miss. I just want to go home." Tiffany cut the recording. "Boom," she said, satisfied. "That is the money shot. I am sending this to Alvarez right now. With this video, the judge will grant the emergency guardianship before lunch is even served on Monday." She turned to Brandon, who was still staring at me. "See," she said, patting his shoulder. "We are doing the right thing. He is gone, Brandon. The man you knew is gone. We are just managing the remains. It is a mercy, really." Brandon nodded slowly. He did not look convinced, but he looked defeated. He was a weak man, crushed under the heel of a woman who saw people as line items on a balance sheet. I stood there, swaying, pretending to be lost in my own kitchen. But inside I was screaming. The pain of seeing my son look at me with pity instead of respect was worse than any physical blow. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to yell that I was sharper than both of them combined. But I swallowed the rage. I let it burn in my gut, fueling the fire that would soon consume their lies. Go sit down in the living room, Hank, Tiffany ordered, waving her hand at me like I was a stray dog. Watch your cartoons. We have paperwork to do. I shuffled into the living room and collapsed onto the sofa. I spent the entire day there pretending to sleep, pretending to talk to thin air. I watched them from under my eyelashes. I saw Tiffany celebrating, showing the video to her friends on FaceTime, laughing about how she was going to turn my room into a wine cellar once I was shipped off. I saw Brandon drinking whiskey at 2 in the afternoon, trying to drown the conscience that was scratching at the back of his mind. Night fell slowly. The house grew quiet. They went to bed early, exhausted from the excitement of their perceived victory. They thought I was sedated. They thought I was helpless. They didn't even bother to lock the basement door from the outside anymore. Why would they? A man who thinks he is in 1970 doesn't try to escape. I waited until the digital clock on the cable box read 2 a.m. The house was silent save for the rhythmic humming of the refrigerator. I sat up. The transformation was instant. The slouch vanished. The tremor in my hands disappeared. I was Hank Patterson, and I had work to do. I went downstairs to the basement. I did not use the door. The front door had an alarm system that chirped every time it opened. I couldn't risk it. I went to the small window high up on the wall. It was a narrow hopper window meant for ventilation, barely 14 inches high. Tiffany had piled old boxes in front of it, thinking it was inaccessible. I moved the boxes silently. I looked at the latch. It was painted shut. A novice would have tried to force it and broken the glass, making noise. I took out my pocket knife. I carefully scored the paint around the seal, applying steady, even pressure. Then, using the flat head of a screwdriver I had stashed, I gently pried the frame loose. It popped open with a soft groan that was lost in the wind outside. I dragged a sturdy crate over and stepped up. This was the test. A 70-year-old man with dementia couldn't do this, but a man who had spent his life climbing in and out of engine bays, contorting his body to reach impossible bolts, certainly could. I slid my head and shoulders through the opening. The cold night air hit my face, smelling of rain and wet asphalt. It smelled like freedom. I wriggled my hips through, finding purchase on the brickwork outside with my boots. I lowered myself to the ground, landing silently in the flower bed. I was out. I stayed in the shadows, moving along the side of the house until I reached the street. A black sedan was parked 2 blocks away under the flickering light of a street lamp. The engine was idling softly. I walked up to the car and opened the passenger door. The warmth of the heater wrapped around me. Harrison was sitting in the driver's seat. He looked older than I remembered, his hair white, but his eyes were sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at me, taking in my disheveled appearance, my unbuttoned trousers, my wild hair. Rough night. He asked, a small smile playing on his lips. "You have no idea," I said, buckling my seatbelt. "Did you bring the papers?" He patted a thick leather briefcase on the seat between us. "Everything is here, Hank. The irrevocable trust documents, the transfer deeds, and the trap. It is all drafted exactly as you wanted. But are you sure you want to do this? Once we sign this, there is no going back. You are handing over everything to the trust. You won't technically own a dime." I looked back at the house down the street. It looked peaceful. It looked like a happy family home. But I knew the rot that was festering inside. "Drive, Harrison," I said, staring straight ahead. "I don't want to own the money. I want to use it as a weapon. And on Friday morning, I am going to pull the trigger." Harrison shifted the car into gear. We pulled away into the night, 2 old men armed with nothing but paper and ink, heading to a 24-hour diner to sign the death warrant of my children's greed. The mouse had escaped the cage, and when he came back, he would be the lion. We walked into Harrison's office just as the cleaning crew was finishing up the night shift. The building was a tower of glass and steel in downtown Seattle, a place where men in $3,000 suits made decisions that shifted the stock market. And there I was, Henry Patterson, wearing a stained flannel shirt, unbuttoned trousers, and work boots that had seen better decades, walking across the polished marble floor. I caught a reflection of myself in the darkened window of a conference room. I looked like a vagrant. I looked like a man who had lost everything. And in a way I had. I had lost the only thing that mattered, which was my family. But as I sat down in the plush leather chair across from Harrison's massive mahogany desk, I knew I was about to gain something else. Power. Harrison poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He didn't ask if I wanted one. He just slid the glass across the desk. I took it. My hands were steady now. The act of the confused, senile old man was left back in the basement. Here in this room, I was just Hank. He opened a thick file folder. The sound of the heavy paper turning was the only noise in the room. "Your father was a quiet man," Hank Harrison said, looking over his spectacles. "He didn't trust banks, and he didn't trust the government, but he trusted land, and he trusted me." He pushed a sheet of paper toward me. It was a summary of assets. I picked it up. I had seen the total number before, but seeing the breakdown made it real. It made the air in the room feel heavy. First, Harrison said, pointing to a map attached to the file. "The wind farm in North Dakota. Your father leased the land to a green energy corporation 5 years ago. They built 40 turbines on the ridges. That lease generates $45,000 a month in passive income. Guaranteed. Indexed for inflation." $45,000 a month, I repeated. "That is just the rent, Hank. That doesn't include the value of the land itself." Next is the cattle ranch in Montana. 500 head of Black Angus. It is a fully operational business managed by a foreman who has been there for 20 years. It turns a profit of roughly $400,000 a year. And then there is the Malibu property. He pulled out a photo. It was a small weathered cottage sitting on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. "The house isn't much," Harrison admitted, "but the land. It is one of the last undeveloped oceanfront lots on that stretch of highway. Developers have been trying to buy it for a decade. As it sits right now, it is appraised at $3.5 million. But if you developed it, it could be worth double." I looked at the total at the bottom of the page. $14.2 million. I sat back in the chair, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. I thought about the cold bowl of pasta Tiffany had fed me. I thought about Brandon crying about being broke while he drank whiskey. I could have fixed it all. With one signature, I could have paid off their mortgage, cleared their credit cards, and sent my grandchildren to the best schools in the country. I would have done it too. A week ago, I would have done it without hesitation. But they didn't want my help. They wanted my corpse. Or the next best thing, a living ghost they could control. So Hank Harrison said, leaning forward, "What do you want to do? Do you want me to wire a retainer to a criminal defense attorney? Do you want to file a restraining order? We can have the police at your son's house in an hour." I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, going down a cleansing fire. "No police," I said. "Not yet. If we call the police now, they will just claim it is a domestic dispute. They will say I am confused. Tiffany has videos, Harrison. She has videos of me acting like I have dementia. She has a paper trail." Then what Harrison asked. "I want you to draft a trust," I said. "An irrevocable trust." Harrison nodded, pulling out a legal pad. "Standard procedure. We put the assets in, you are the beneficiary, we name a trustee." "No," I interrupted. "Not standard. I want a specific clause, a trap clause." I leaned over the desk, my voice dropping to a whisper, though we were the only ones there. "I want all the assets, the farms, the house, the cash, everything transferred into this trust immediately. I want it done tonight. But I want a stipulation regarding the beneficiary." I paused, calculating the exact wording. If I continued, the primary beneficiary, that is me, is declared mentally incompetent or incapacitated by a medical professional or a court of law within the next 30 days, the beneficiary status automatically transfers. Transfers to whom Harrison asked, his pen hovering over the paper. To your son, I laughed. It was a dry, humorless bark. No. If I am declared incompetent, 100% of the trust's assets are to be liquidated and donated immediately. 50% to the Wounded Warrior Project. 50% to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Harrison stopped writing. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. Hank, he said softly, do you realize what you are doing? If they succeed, if they get that doctor to sign the paper on Friday, they get nothing. Exactly, I said. Not a dime. Not a penny. They get a guardianship over a pauper. They will have legal authority over a man with zero assets. And I added, I want a second clause. If the competency ruling is later overturned or proven to be fraudulent, the assets revert to me, and the trust covers all legal fees to prosecute the petitioners for fraud and elder abuse. Harrison stared at me for a long moment. Then a slow, grim smile spread across his face. He shook his head. You are your father's son, Hank. He would have loved this. It is a landmine. You are burying a landmine in your own front yard and waiting for them to step on it. Will it hold up in court? I asked. It is ironclad, Harrison said, already typing on his laptop. Once you sign this, the assets belong to the trust. Even if they get guardianship over you, they can't touch property you don't legally own. They will walk into court thinking they are seizing a gold mine, and they will walk out holding a handful of dirt. Type it, I said. We spent the next 2 hours going over the fine print. I signed page after page. My hand was firm. My signature was bold. Henry J. Patterson. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I was no longer a victim waiting to be slaughtered. I was the hunter setting the snare. When the final notary stamp hit the paper, it was 4 a.m. Harrison walked me back to the car. The city was still asleep, unaware of the war that was being waged in a quiet suburban basement. I will have the certified copies of the trust with me on Friday, Harrison said. I will wait for your signal. Don't come in until I say the word, I told him. I want them to sign. I want them to commit the crime. I want their names on that guardianship petition. I want there to be no doubt, no, it was a misunderstanding defense. I want them to hang themselves. I understand, Harrison said. Good luck, Hank. He dropped me off 2 blocks from the house. I walked back through the damp grass, my boots silent on the earth. The window was still open just as I had left it. I climbed back in, grunting with the effort squeezing my shoulders through the narrow frame. I replaced the glass. I pushed the paint chips back into place to hide the break. I dragged the boxes back in front of the window. I stripped off my clothes and put on the same dirty pajamas I had worn the day before. I messed up my hair. I took out my dentures. I sat down on the edge of the cot. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of the fight. Above me, the floorboards creaked. Someone was waking up. Probably Tiffany getting up to use the bathroom or get a glass of water. She was walking on top of a volcano, and she didn't even know it. I lay back on the pillow and closed my eyes. Let them come, I thought. Let the doctor come. Let them bring their lies and their greed. I am ready. The trap is set, and when it snaps shut, the sound will be deafening. I lay on the cot with my eyes closed, but my senses were screaming. The sun had barely begun to color the sky when the door at the top of the stairs flew open with a violence that shook the dust from the ceiling rafters. It was not the slow creak of a family waking up. It was the stomp of a warden coming to inspect the prisoner. Tiffany descended the stairs. She was not wearing her silk robe this time. She was dressed in sharp, angular clothing ready for war. She did not say a word to me. She walked straight to the small hopper window I had climbed through just an hour ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had replaced the glass. I had pushed the paint chips back. I had dragged the heavy boxes of old magazines back in front of it. But Tiffany possessed a paranoia born of guilt. She sniffed the air like a bloodhound. She stared at the boxes. She reached out a manicured hand and ran a finger along the dusty sill. She paused. She saw a smudge in the dust, a smudge shaped like the toe of a work boot. She turned to face me slowly. Her eyes were not angry. They were something far worse. They were dead. They were the eyes of a shark that had decided the prey was trying to swim away. She did not ask if I had gone out. She did not ask where I had been. She simply walked over to the corner of the room where I kept my small jug of water and kicked it over. The water spilled out, soaking into the concrete floor. "You seem restless, Hank," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Restless people get hurt. We need to make sure you stay calm until the doctor comes tomorrow." She turned and marched back up the stairs. The lock clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the damp air. 20 minutes later, she returned. She carried a bowl of oatmeal. It was not the instant kind. It was thick gray sludge. Even from 5 feet away, I could smell the metallic tang of the sedative. She had doubled the dose, maybe tripled it. She was not taking any chances. She wanted me comatose. "Eat," she commanded. I sat up, feigning weakness. My hands trembled as I took the bowl. I looked at her, letting my mouth hang open slightly. "I am not hungry," I slurred. "My stomach hurts." "I did not ask if you were hungry," she snapped. "I said eat. You need your strength for tomorrow." She stood over me, arms crossed. She was going to watch every spoonful. Panic rose in my throat. If I ate this, I would not just be sleepy. I would be unconscious. I would miss the meeting. I would lose the war. I lifted the spoon. The gray mush quivered. I brought it to my lips. As the spoon entered my mouth, I enacted the plan I had formulated in the dark. I let out a violent hacking cough. It was a wet, rattling sound that shook my entire frame. I doubled over, bringing my left hand up to cover my mouth, as if to stifle the cough. Inside the sleeve of my flannel shirt, taped to my wrist, was a thick plastic sandwich bag. As I coughed and retched, I spit the mouthful of oatmeal into the bag instead of swallowing it. I did it again, and again, coughing, sputtering, acting like a dying old man choking on his last meal. "Disgusting," Tiffany sneered, stepping back to avoid any splatter. "Look at you. You are like an animal." I managed to empty half the bowl into the bag hidden in my sleeve before I sat back, gasping for air, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "I cannot," I wheezed. "I cannot eat more." She looked at the half-empty bowl. She seemed satisfied that I had ingested enough to knock out a horse. "Fine," she said, snatching the bowl away. "Go back to sleep. And do not make a mess." She left, locking the door again. I waited until her footsteps faded into the kitchen above. I rushed to the corner of the room, unbuttoned my cuff, and carefully removed the bag of toxic sludge. I hid it deep inside the lining of my old mattress, burying it where she would never look. The hours dragged on. The basement grew hotter as the day progressed. My throat was parched, but my water jug was empty on the floor. I needed to use the bathroom. I walked up the stairs and knocked on the door. "Tiffany," I called out, keeping my voice weak. "I need to use the restroom." There was silence. Then the door opened a crack. But the chain was still on. I could see her eye through the gap. "No," she said. What I asked, confused. "I really need to go. You are not coming up here," she said. "I just had the carpets cleaned. You smell like mildew and old age. I am not having you drag your filth through my house." "But where am I supposed to go?" I pleaded. She disappeared for a moment. When she returned, she was holding a blue plastic bucket, a bucket used for mopping floors. She unhooked the chain, opened the door just enough to throw the bucket down the stairs. It clattered loudly, bouncing off the wooden steps before landing at my feet. "Use that," she said. I stared at the bucket. I stared at the woman who had married my son, the woman I had welcomed into my home, the woman whose debts I had paid. "You cannot be serious," I whispered. "I am a human being." "You are a liability," she hissed. "You are a problem that is about to be solved. Do not come up here again until the doctor arrives. If I hear you knocking, I will tell Brandon you tried to attack me." She slammed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking at the blue bucket. The humiliation washed over me like a wave of ice water. This was it. This was the bottom. They had stripped me of my home, my money, my dignity, and now they were forcing me to relieve myself in a bucket like a dog in a kennel. I felt a tear run down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. This was what they wanted. They wanted to break me so completely that when the doctor looked into my eyes tomorrow, he would see nothing but a hollow shell. I picked up the bucket. I gripped the plastic handle until my knuckles turned white. I walked over to the center of the room. I looked up at the smoke detector mounted on the ceiling beam. Inside that detector was a tiny lens, a high-definition camera I had installed 2 days ago. I looked directly into the lens. I did not slouch. I did not shake. I stood tall, my spine straight, my jaw set. I held the bucket up to the camera, showcasing their cruelty for the world to see. "Tiffany," I whispered to the silent room, my voice steady and cold as steel. "You think this is the end. You think you have won. But you have just handed me the hammer, and tomorrow I am going to use it to smash your world into dust. You will pay for this bucket. You will pay for every single second of this." I set the bucket down in the corner. I sat on my cot. I crossed my arms. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I sat there in the dark, fueling my resolve with the memory of her sneer. The mechanic was gone. The father was gone. All that was left in the basement was the executioner waiting for the sun to rise. Friday morning arrived with a gray, suffocating sky. It was the kind of weather that felt heavy on your shoulders, pressing you down into the earth. I had not slept. I had spent the night staring at the blue bucket in the corner of the basement, fueling my resolve with every humiliating second. When I heard the lock click on the basement door, I did not move immediately. I let them wait. I let them wonder if the drugs had finally stopped my heart. Tiffany came down first. She did not look at me. She looked at the bucket. She wrinkled her nose in disgust, spraying a cloud of floral air freshener into the room before she even spoke. "Get up, Hank," she said, her voice tight with anticipation. "They are here." I rose slowly from the cot. My joints popped. I had not washed in 2 days. My stubble was gray and rough. I let my mouth hang slack, my eyes unfocused. I shuffled past her, dragging my feet on the concrete steps. I was no longer a man in her eyes. I was a package to be delivered. They led me to the dining room table, the same table where they had told me I had outlived my usefulness. Now it was set for a different kind of meal. There were no plates, just stacks of crisp white paper and a black fountain pen sitting in the center like a weapon. 2 men were waiting. One I recognized from the photos in Brandon's office. Alvarez, the lawyer. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first house, and he had the predatory smile of a man who made his living feasting on tragedy. The other man was older, disheveled, with a stain on his tie and shaking hands. Dr. Reynolds, the hired gun, the medical professional who was willing to sell his oath for an envelope of cash. "Sit down," Mr. Patterson, Alvarez said, gesturing to the chair. I collapsed into the seat. I looked around the room, letting my head roll on my shoulders. Is it time for supper?" I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. He did not check my pulse. He did not shine a light in my eyes. He did not ask me to count backwards from 100. He simply looked at me with bored, watery eyes. "Mr. Patterson, do you know what year it is?" Reynolds asked. I looked at him blankly. I looked at Brandon, who was standing in the corner chewing on his fingernails. It is the year of the flood," I whispered. "We lost the barn. The water took the barn." Reynolds turned to Tiffany and nodded. He pulled a clipboard from his briefcase and scribbled a signature with a flourish. "Classic presentation," Reynolds said, his voice flat. "Disoriented. Hallucinating past trauma. Unable to recognize immediate family. I am certifying him as stage 4. Advanced Alzheimer's with rapid onset dementia. He is incapable of making legal or financial decisions." Just like that. In 30 seconds, he had erased my sanity. He had declared me a vegetable, so... Alvarez smiled. He slid the stack of papers toward me. "Thank you, doctor. Now we just need the formality." He looked at me, his voice dropping to a condescending coo, the way one speaks to a toddler or a dog. "Hank, we need you to sign this paper. It is just a permission slip. It lets Brandon and Tiffany take care of you. It lets them pay your bills and make sure you are safe. You want to be safe, don't you?" I looked down at the document. The words were bold and black. Permanent transfer of guardianship and asset management. It was a death warrant. It gave them power of attorney. It gave them the right to sell my property, access my bank accounts, and determine my medical care. It gave them the power to lock me away and throw away the key. I hesitated. I let my hand hover over the paper. I do not understand," I mumbled. Brandon stepped forward. This was his part. He had to be the loving son. He knelt beside my chair. I could smell the whiskey on his breath even at 10 in the morning. His eyes were red, brimming with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of guilt. Tears of fear. "Dad, please," Brandon said, his voice cracking. "Just sign it. We are doing this for you. We just want to help you. You are sick, Dad. You do not remember things. If you sign this, we can get you the best doctors. We can take care of you properly." I looked at my son. I looked deep into his eyes. I wanted to see a flicker of hesitation. I wanted to see him stop this madness. But I saw nothing but cowardice. He was willing to sacrifice his father to save his house. He was willing to label me insane to cover his own failures. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It was the death of hope. The death of the last shred of affection I held for them. Tiffany was standing behind him, her hands gripping the back of his chair. She was not crying. She was vibrating with tension. Her eyes were fixed on the pen. She was mentally willing me to pick it up. She was already spending the money. She was already paying off the credit cards. She was already celebrating. "Sign it, Hank," she whispered. "Do it for Brandon." I reached out. My hand shook violently. I grabbed the pen. It felt heavy and cold. I looked at the signature line. Beneficiary, Ward, incompetent. I brought the pen tip down to the paper. I pressed hard enough to make a small dot of ink bloom on the white page. The room went silent. I could hear Tiffany's breath hitch in her throat. I could hear the scratching of Dr. Reynolds's pen as he filled out his invoice. I could hear the beating of my own heart, slow and steady, a war drum in the silence. I paused. I lifted the pen slightly. Is this for the tractor?" I asked, looking up at Brandon. "Did we buy the new tractor?" "Just sign it," Tiffany snapped, her patience snapping like a dry twig. "Sign the damn paper." Hank Alvarez shot her a warning look. "Gently, Mrs. Patterson. We need this to look voluntary." Brandon covered my hand with his. His palm was sweaty. "Yes, Dad," he lied. "It is for the tractor. It is for the farm. Just sign your name and we can go home." "We can go home." The irony was bitter like bile. I was home, and they were trying to steal it from me. I looked at the paper one last time. I saw the future they had planned for me. A lonely room in a state facility. Sedated days, forgotten nights. A pauper's grave. I gripped the pen tighter. I let the tremor in my hand increase until the pen rattled against the table. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay. I will sign." Tiffany let out a long, shuddering breath. She leaned in closer, her eyes wide, hungry, devouring the moment. "That is it," she breathed. "Just right there on the line." I lowered the pen again. I watched the ink flow. I watched the trap I had built so carefully over the last 3 days prepare to spring. They thought they were watching an old man sign away his life. They had no idea they were watching the fuse of a bomb being lit. I pressed the nib to the paper. I started to write. But I did not write Henry. I stopped. I looked up. And for the first time in 3 days, I stopped shaking. "Wait," I said. My voice was no longer a whisper. It was clear. It was strong. Tiffany froze. Brandon pulled his hand back as if burned. What Tiffany hissed. "What is it now?" I sat up straight in the chair. I rolled my shoulders back. I looked directly at Dr. Reynolds, then at Alvarez, and finally at my son and his wife. The fog in my eyes cleared instantly, replaced by a gaze of pure, unadulterated judgment. I think I said, placing the pen down on the table with a deliberate click, that before I sign this, you should probably see what you are actually inheriting. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt. Tiffany's eyes followed my hand. She expected a handkerchief. She expected a tissue. Instead, I pulled out a folded piece of paper. The bank statement. The appraisal. The $14.2 million truth. I unfolded it slowly, smoothing it out on the table right next to their guardianship petition. "I think we need to talk about the price of tractors," I said. And then I smiled. The ink from the pen hovered just a millimeter above the signature line. I could feel the vibration of the room. I could feel Tiffany's greed radiating off her like heat from a furnace. I could hear Brandon's ragged breathing, the sound of a man drowning in his own conscience. They were all leaning in 4 vultures, circling what they thought was a dying animal, waiting for me to sign away my freedom. I looked at the word incompetent, printed in bold letters next to where my name was supposed to go. Incompetent. That was the word they used to describe the man who had built 3 houses with his bare hands. The man who had kept a fleet of 50 excavators running through blizzards. The man who had raised a son and buried a wife and never once asked for a handout. I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then I stopped shaking. It was not a gradual stop. It was instant. My hand, which had been trembling with a practiced rhythm for 3 days, became as steady as a rock. I tightened my grip on the pen, not with the weak grasp of an invalid, but with the crushing strength of a mechanic who spent 40 years wrestling with rusted bolts. I lifted my head. I did not lift it slowly. I lifted it with purpose. I locked eyes with Tiffany. The fog that had clouded my gaze for the last 72 hours evaporated instantly. My eyes were clear. They were sharp. They were cold. "Tiffany," I said. My voice was not a croak. It was not a whisper. It was a deep, resonant baritone that filled the dining room. It was the voice I used to command work crews. It was the voice of authority. "The tea you made this morning." I continued holding her gaze until she flinched. "You went a little light on the sedatives. I can still taste the peppermint, trying to hide the chemical bitterness, but it lacks the kick it had last night. You are getting sloppy." The room went so quiet you could have heard a pin drop on a carpet. Tiffany's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face went pale, the blood draining away so fast, it looked like she might faint. She looked at the pen in my steady hand. She looked at my clear eyes. Brandon let out a small, strangled noise like a whimpering dog. I placed the pen down on the table. I did not drop it. I set it down with a deliberate, audible click. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I did not struggle to rise. I did not use the armrests for support. I stood up to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I rolled my shoulders back, hearing the satisfying pop of my spine straightening out after days of hunched deception. I looked down at them. Suddenly, the dynamic in the room shifted. I was no longer the small, withered thing in the chair. I was the giant in the room. "I am not crazy," I said, enunciating every word with lethal precision. "And I certainly do not have Alzheimer's. I have just been sitting here watching you perform. And frankly, the acting was terrible." Dr. Reynolds, the hired gun with the stain on his tie, started to stammer. He grabbed his briefcase, his hands shaking. "Mr. Patterson, this is a medical anomaly. Sometimes patients have moments of lucidity." "Sit down," I barked. The command was so sudden and so forceful that Reynolds actually fell back into his chair. "You diagnosed me with stage 4 dementia in less than 60 seconds, I said, pointing a calloused finger at him. "You did not check my vitals. You did not ask me a single medical question. You just took the check that is currently sitting in your left jacket pocket. That is malpractice, doctor, and it is a felony." I turned my gaze to Alvarez, the lawyer. He was smarter than the doctor. He was already reaching for the guardianship papers, trying to slide them back into his briefcase. "Leave them," I said. "Those are evidence." Alvarez froze. He slowly pulled his hand back. "Mr. Patterson," he said, his voice smooth but tight. "Clearly there has been a misunderstanding. We were acting on the information provided by your family. If you are indeed competent, then obviously this meeting is over." "Oh, this meeting is just getting started," I said. I looked at Brandon. My son. He was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. Real tears this time. Tears of terror. "Dad," he whispered. I didn't know." "Stop," I said. "Do not insult my intelligence, Brandon. You knew. You watched her put the powder in my tea. You watched me vomit into a bucket because she wouldn't let me use the bathroom. You stood there and you did nothing. You are not a victim here. You are an accomplice." I reached into the inside pocket of my flannel shirt. Tiffany flinched, stepping back as if she thought I was pulling out a gun. In a way, I was. I did not pull out a handkerchief. I did not pull out a pair of reading glasses. I pulled out a folded document. It was thick. It was heavy. It was the certified asset appraisal I had received from Harrison. I unfolded it. The paper crinkled loudly in the silent room. I smoothed it out on the table, placing it directly on top of their pathetic guardianship petition. "You wanted to know about the tractor," I said to Brandon, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You wanted to know if I had money. You wanted to know if I was worth keeping around." I tapped my finger on the bottom line of the document. $14,200,000. I watched the realization hit them. It was like a physical wave. Tiffany's eyes bulged. She leaned forward, reading the numbers, her brain unable to comprehend what she was seeing. 14 million, she gasped. Her voice was faint, breathless. 3 farms I listed, ticking them off on my fingers. A wind energy contract, a vineyard, and a beachfront property in Malibu. My father left it all to me, and I came home on Monday to give it to you. I paused, letting that sink in. I saw the horror on Brandon's face as he realized what he had done. He had tried to steal pennies from a man who was bringing him a fortune. "I was going to pay off your mortgage," I said. "I was going to set up trust funds for the kids. I was going to buy you that yoga studio you wanted so badly, Tiffany. I was going to give you the world." Tiffany reached out a trembling hand toward the paper. Her greed was so instinctive, so overpowering, that even now she couldn't stop herself. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking into a desperate smile. "Dad, this is amazing. We are rich." I snatched the paper away before she could touch it. "No," I said coldly. "I am rich. You are destitute." I reached into my other pocket. I pulled out a second stack of papers. These were not crisp and white. They were copies of the documents I had stolen from Brandon's office. The credit card statements, the foreclosure notice, the crypto losses. I threw them onto the table. They scattered like leaves. "I know about the $84,000 in credit card debt," I said. "I know about the foreclosure. The sheriff is coming in 25 days to lock the doors, isn't he? I know about the $150,000 you lost gambling on crypto, Brandon." Brandon put his head in his hands and sobbed. "I know why you did this," I continued, my voice hard as iron. "You didn't just want me out. You needed a host. You are parasites. You sucked me dry when I sold my house, and when that money ran out, you decided to cannibalize me. You were going to lock me in a state home and live off my Social Security checks while you waited for me to die." I looked at Tiffany. She was backing away, her back hitting the wall. "You called me useless," I said. "You made me use a bucket. You treated me like an animal." I took a step toward her. She cowered. "Well, Tiffany," I said, "the animal is out of the cage, and he has a very long memory." I turned back to the table and picked up the guardianship petition. I ripped it in half. The sound was loud, violent, final. I ripped it again, and again, until it was nothing but confetti raining down on the table. Then I looked at the door. "Harrison," I called out. "Come in." The front door opened. Harrison walked in, followed by 2 uniformed police officers and the county sheriff. The room seemed to shrink. The air was sucked out of it. I turned to my son and his wife. "I told you I wasn't crazy," I said, "but I never said I wasn't dangerous." The silence that followed my declaration was shattered not by a sob, but by a scream that sounded less like a human woman and more like a wounded animal. Tiffany did not look at me with regret. She did not look at me with shame. She looked at the document on the table, and then she looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost blinding. To her twisted mind, I was not a father who had just revealed a fortune. I was a thief who had been hiding her property. She lunged across the table. Her manicured nails, usually so perfect, clawed at the air as she tried to snatch the appraisal document. "That is mine," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "That is my money. You have been sitting on $14 million while I have been drowning in debt. How dare you? How dare you hide this from me?" I snatched the paper back before her fingers could touch it. I folded it calmly and placed it back in my pocket. "It is not your money, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady against her chaos. "It never was." She came around the table, her face twisted and red. She grabbed the lapels of my flannel shirt and shook me. It was pathetic. She was a small, angry woman trying to shake a mountain. "You owe me," she screamed, spittle flying from her mouth. "I took you in. I let you live in my house. I fed you. You owe me everything. You are going to sign that check over to me right now. You are going to pay off my credit cards. You are going to pay off this mortgage. I am the mother of your grandchildren. You work for me." I looked down at her hands gripping my shirt. I did not push her away immediately. I let the lawyer and the doctor see this. I let them see the violence in her. Alvarez, the lawyer, stood up, looking pale. "Mrs. Patterson, please," he said, his voice trembling. "You are assaulting him. Stop!" She ignored him. She was lost in the madness of greed. "Give it to me," she chanted, shaking me again. "Give me the money. It is mine. It is mine." I reached up and took her wrists. My hands were large and calloused. strengthened by decades of turning wrenches. I squeezed. Not enough to break bone, but enough to make her understand the reality of the situation. I removed her hands from my shirt and pushed her back. She stumbled, hitting the wall with a dull thud. "You do not own me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And you certainly do not own my father's legacy. You are not a victim here, Tiffany. You are just a greedy child who broke her toys and now wants someone else to buy her new ones." She slid down the wall, sobbing. But they were angry tears. She was muttering about unfairness, about how she deserved a vacation, about how I was a monster for withholding her inheritance. Then there was a movement to my right. It was Brandon, my son, the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had carried on my shoulders. He threw himself to the floor. He did not just kneel, he crawled. He crawled toward me on his hands and knees until he was at my boots. He reached out and wrapped his arms around my legs, burying his face in my dirty work trousers. "Dad," he wailed, his voice muffled by the fabric. "Dad, please. You have to believe me." I looked down at the top of his head. I felt a wave of nausea. This was not dignity. This was not remorse. This was survival instinct kicking in. He saw the ship sinking, and he was trying to climb onto the only life raft left. "I did not know, Dad," he sobbed, looking up at me with wet, pleading eyes. "I did not know she was going to go this far. She made me do it. She told me we would lose the house. She told me you were sick. I was scared, Dad. I was just scared. She manipulated me. I am your son. You know I love you. Please, Dad. Do not let me go down for this." I looked at his tear-stained face. I tried to find the son I loved. I tried to find the man I thought I had raised. But all I saw was a stranger. A weak, spineless stranger who would sell his own blood to save his own skin. I reached down. For a second, hope flared in his eyes. He thought I was going to pull him up. He thought I was going to hug him and tell him it was all Tiffany's fault. Instead, I grabbed his wrists and tore his grip from my legs. I shoved him away with a force that sent him sprawling backward onto the carpet. "Do not lie to me," I roared. The sound of my anger filled the room, silencing even Tiffany's sobbing. "She made you do it?" I asked, taking a step toward him. He scrambled backward like a crab, terrified. "Did she make you stand there on Monday night when she said I should be thrown in a shelter?" I asked. "Did she hold a gun to your head when you agreed to kick me out?" "In 48 hours, Brandon stammered, shaking his head. "No, Dad, Did she force you to watch me drink that tea?" I continued, my voice relentless. "You sat right there, Brandon. You sat on that sofa and watched me swallow poison. You asked her if it was safe, and when she said it would turn my brain to mush for 3 days, you didn't call the police. You asked for another whiskey." I was drunk," he pleaded. "I was stressed. And the bucket," I shouted. "The bucket in the basement." "Did she force you to ignore me when I knocked on the door begging to use the bathroom?" "You heard me knocking." "I know you did. The floorboards are thin. You sat there and let your father live like a dog in his own home." Brandon fell silent. He looked down at the carpet, unable to meet my gaze. "I could forgive a mistake, Brandon," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper that cut deeper than the shouting. "I could forgive bad investments. I could even forgive you asking for money. But I cannot forgive the silence." I pointed at him. "You watched her abuse me. You watched her drug me. And you said nothing. Your silence was your signature on that death warrant just as much as if you had held the pen. You are not a victim. You are a co-conspirator. You are weak. And your weakness is more dangerous than her greed, because at least she is honest about what she is." I turned away from him. I could not look at him anymore. It hurt too much. It was like looking at a grave. I looked at Dr. Reynolds. He was trying to inch toward the door, clutching his briefcase. "Sit down," I commanded without even looking at him. He froze. "Mr. Patterson," he squeaked, "I really must be going. I have patience." "You are not going anywhere," I said. "You signed a legal document declaring a healthy man incompetent without a medical exam. You are going to stay right there and explain your diagnostic methods to the authorities." "And you, Alvarez," I said, turning to the lawyer. "You drafted a fraudulent petition. You conspired to commit grand larceny and elder abuse. I hope you have a good lawyer of your own. You are going to need one." The room was heavy with the smell of fear. Tiffany was still slumped against the wall, staring at nothing, muttering about her yoga studio. Brandon was curled in a ball on the floor, weeping softly. The professionals were sweating through their expensive suits, and I stood in the center of it all, a 70-year-old mechanic in dirty clothes holding the power of truth. I walked over to the window. I pulled back the curtain. I saw the flashing blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement before I heard the sound. Then it came. The wail of sirens. Not one, not two, but 3 police cruisers screeching to a halt in front of the house. I turned back to the room. "That is my ride," I said. "And it is yours, too." I looked at Tiffany one last time. "You wanted me out of the house by Friday," I said. "Congratulations. We are all leaving." The heavy thud of boots hitting the front porch steps echoed through the house. Then came the pounding on the door. "Police, open up!" I didn't move to open it. I let the fear marinate in the room for one last second. I looked at the luxury furniture, the expensive art, the facade of a happy life they had built on lies. It was all over. I walked to the door and unlocked it. "Officer," I said, as the sheriff stepped in, looking grim. "I am glad you are here. I would like to report a robbery of a life. And I have the thieves waiting right here in the dining room." The sheriff stepped into the dining room, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. He was a big man, a man I had known for 20 years, a man who had bought auto parts from me and shaken my hand at church. But today he was not my neighbor. He was the arm of the law. He looked at the scene before him. The scattered papers, the crying son, the hysterical daughter-in-law, and me standing tall in the middle of the wreckage. Sheriff Miller looked at Tiffany, who was trying to scramble to her feet, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Then he looked at me. "Hank," he said, his voice deep and serious, "we received the digital files from your attorney. We listened to the audio recording from Monday night. And we watched the video from the basement." Tiffany froze. Her face, already pale, turned the color of ash. "Video," she whispered. I pointed to the ceiling. "Smoke detector," I said calmly. "High definition. Night vision. It captured everything, Tiffany. It captured you throwing the bucket down the stairs. It captured you laughing about how the drugs would turn my brain to mush. It captured you mixing the sedatives into my oatmeal this morning." I turned to Harrison. "Show them," I said. Harrison opened his laptop on the dining room table. He turned the screen so everyone could see. He clicked play. The video was clear. It showed Tiffany in the kitchen opening a capsule of white powder and dumping it into my tea, stirring it with a look of intense concentration. Then it cut to the basement, showing her kicking over my water jug and sneering at me. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. "That is enough," Sheriff Miller said. He walked over to Tiffany. He reached for his belt. The sound of the handcuffs clicking open was loud and mechanical. "Tiffany Roberts Patterson," he said, reciting the words that signaled the end of her life as she knew it. "You are under arrest for attempted bodily harm, distribution of a controlled substance, and felony elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent." Tiffany stared at the handcuffs as if they were venomous snakes. She backed away, shaking her head violently. "No," she gasped. "No, you do not understand. He is lying. That video is fake. He is the one who is crazy. Look at him. He is dirty. He is senile. Sheriff Miller did not argue. He grabbed her wrist. He spun her around. "Turn around, ma'am." When the cold steel touched her skin, something in Tiffany snapped. The facade of the sophisticated upper-middle-class housewife crumbled completely. She let out a shriek that made the crystal chandelier vibrate. "Get off me!" she screamed, thrashing against the sheriff's grip. "You cannot arrest me! Do you know who I am? This is my house! That old man is a squatter! He is a thief!" The second officer moved in to help restrain her. She was kicking and biting a feral animal cornered in a trap of her own making. I watched her. I watched the woman who had terrorized me for a week, being subdued by the consequences of her actions. I felt no joy. I felt no vindication. I just felt a deep, profound exhaustion. Alvarez, the lawyer, tried to slip past the commotion toward the door. He was clutching his briefcase to his chest, his eyes fixed on the exit. "Officer," I called out without turning my head. "Do not let him leave." The third officer stepped in front of Alvarez, blocking his path. "Mr. Alvarez," the officer said, "we have a warrant for your arrest as well. Conspiracy to commit fraud and falsifying legal documents." Alvarez dropped his briefcase. His shoulders slumped. He knew the game was over. He put his hands behind his back without a fight. He was a coward who fought with paper, and now that paper had failed him, he had no fight left. Dr. Reynolds was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. He sat in the chair, staring at his hands. I was just a consultant," he stammered to no one in particular. I didn't know. "Tell it to the medical board," I said to him. "You sold your license for a quick payday. I hope it was worth it." The officers began to lead them out. Tiffany was still screaming. She twisted her head back to look at me. Her eyes were wild, filled with a venom that would have killed a lesser man. "You did this," she screeched, her voice raw and tearing at her throat. "You did this to me, you evil old man. You sat there and watched me. You set me up. You are the devil, Hank." "You are the devil," I looked at her one last time. "No, Tiffany," I said softly, though she could not hear me over her own screaming. "I am just a mirror. I just showed you who you really are." They dragged her out the front door. I heard the neighbors gathering outside. I heard the murmurs of shock. I heard the car doors slam shut. Then the sirens wailed again, fading into the distance, taking the toxicity that had poisoned this house with them. The house fell silent. The police had taken the criminals. Harrison had gone outside to speak with the sheriff about the evidence handoff. It was just me and Brandon. My son was still on the floor. He was curled into a fetal position near the table leg. He was weeping, his body shaking with great heaving sobs. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The rain had stopped. The sun was trying to break through the gray clouds. It was going to be a nice day. I turned back to Brandon. "Get up," I said. He did not move. I said, "Get up, Brandon." He slowly uncurled himself. He sat up, wiping his face with his sleeve. He looked at me with eyes that were red and swollen. He looked pathetic. And for a moment I wanted to pity him. I wanted to tell him that we could fix this, that I had $14 million and I could hire him the best lawyer and we could start over. But then I remembered the silence. I remembered him sitting on the couch while I begged to use the bathroom. "Dad," he whispered. "What? What happens now?" I looked around the room. I looked at the expensive furniture. I looked at the big screen TV. I looked at the life he had built on debt and lies. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the set of house keys I still had. I placed them on the dining table right next to the torn pieces of the guardianship petition. "I am leaving, Brandon," I said. Brandon's eyes widened. "Leaving, but you can't. You have the money. You have the trust. You can save the house. Dad, they are going to foreclose. I have nowhere to go. I have no job. Tiffany is gone. I am all alone. I looked at him. I felt a pang of sorrow, sharp and deep, but I pushed it down. You are not alone, I said. You have the consequences of your choices. They will keep you company. But the house, he pleaded, reaching out a hand toward me. The bank owns this house, I said. I saw the notice. You have until next Tuesday before the sheriff comes back to put a padlock on that door. Dad, please, he cried, scrambling to his feet. You can't do this. I am your son. You have $14 million. You can write a check right now and fix everything. Just one check, that is all it takes. I looked at him with a cold detachment. I could. I agreed. I could write a check. I could hire a lawyer to defend Tiffany. I could pay off your crypto losses. I could buy you a new life. I walked toward the door. My boots echoed on the floor. I stopped with my hand on the knob. I did not turn back to look at him. But I won't, I said. Why, he screamed. Why? Because I said, staring at the wood of the door. Money can buy a house, Brandon, but it cannot buy character, and it certainly cannot buy a father's forgiveness once you have sold it for a yoga studio. I opened the door. The fresh air hit my face. Dad, he screamed again, his voice breaking. Where are you going? I stepped out onto the porch. I am going to live my life, I said. I suggest you find a way to start living yours. I stepped off the porch and walked down the driveway. I did not look back. I heard him shouting my name. I heard him begging. I heard him crying. But I kept walking. I walked past the manicured lawn. I walked past the mailbox. I walked down the street toward where my RV was waiting. I was 70 years old. I had no family left. I had a broken heart. But as I walked down that street, leaving the wreckage of my past behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt light. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain and pine needles. It smelled like a new beginning. 6 months have passed since the day the police cars rolled away from that suburban house in Seattle. Time has a funny way of clarifying things. Back then I thought my life was ending, but today I know it was just beginning. I am currently standing on a cliff edge in Malibu, California, looking out at the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet that no camera could ever truly capture. Behind me, parked on the prime oceanfront land my father left me, sits my new home. It is a 45-foot custom Prevost motor coach. I paid $450,000 for it in cash. It has heated marble floors, a kitchen better than most restaurants, and an engine that purrs like a giant cat. But the best feature isn't the luxury, it is the wheels. Because these wheels mean that I am never trapped again. I can go anywhere. I can see anything. The world is no longer a dark basement with a bucket in the corner. It is this. It is the wind in my hair and the roar of the ocean. I think about them sometimes. Not with love and not with hate anymore, just with a distant pity. I received a letter from the district attorney last week updating me on the case. Tiffany accepted a plea deal to avoid a 20-year sentence. She pleaded guilty to felony elder abuse and attempted bodily harm. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in a state penitentiary. I heard she screamed when the gavel came down. She screamed that it wasn't fair, that she was used to a certain lifestyle. Now she has a lifestyle of metal bars and prison food. She wanted to control a cage, and now she lives in one. And Brandon, my son, the boy who watched me drink poison and said nothing. He lost the house 3 weeks after I left. The bank did not wait. They foreclosed and auctioned it off to pay the debts. He called me once about 2 months ago. It was a short call. He told me he was working as a dishwasher at a diner in Tacoma. He sleeps in a rented room above a garage. He asked me for $500 to fix his car. I told him that I loved him enough to let him learn how to survive on his own. I hung up. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but I knew that giving him money would be like giving whiskey to an alcoholic. He needs to find his own backbone because I can no longer be his spine. I did not keep all the money for myself. I established the Martha Patterson Scholarship Fund in honor of my late wife. It pays full tuition for kids who want to go to trade school. Mechanics, plumbers, electricians. Kids who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Kids who understand the value of hard work. Every time I sign a check for one of those students, I feel Martha smiling at me. We are building a new legacy, one that is built on sweat and integrity, not greed and shortcuts. The smell of barbecue is wafting through the air. I have a smoker set up outside the RV. I am slow cooking ribs with my secret dry rub, but I am not eating alone. Sitting around the fire pit are my new friends. There is Sarah, a retired school teacher I met in Arizona, and Mike, a young digital nomad traveling in a van. They do not know I am a millionaire. They do not know about the $14 million or the farms. They just know me as Hank, the guy who can fix anything and makes the best ribs on the West Coast. They like me for my stories, not my wallet. And that is a richness that no amount of money can buy. I look at them laughing and sharing food, and I realize that this is what family is supposed to be. It is not about whose DNA you share. It is about who sits by your fire and makes you feel warm. It is about who respects you. I spent so long trying to buy the love of people who viewed me as an ATM machine. I tolerated the disrespect because I thought that was my duty as a father. I thought that suffering was part of the job description. But I was wrong. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped in a relationship that drains you, listen to me closely. You are not a bad person for wanting to save yourself. You are not cruel for demanding respect. I had to lose a son to find myself. It was a terrible price to pay, but the alternative was losing my soul. Do not let blood tie you to abuse. Do not let the title of mother or father or child be a license for someone to mistreat you. Imagine your life is a body. Sometimes you develop a tumor. It is part of you, it grew inside you, but if you do not cut it out, it will kill you. I cut out the tumor. And now, for the first time in years, I can finally breathe. I am going to turn off this microphone now. The ribs are ready, and my friends are waiting. The sun has dipped below the horizon, and the stars are coming out. They are bright and clear and beautiful, just like my future. There is one more thing I want to share with you before I sign off. Last week I drove my RV back to North Dakota, not to visit the farm, but to visit a vocational school in Bismarck. I wanted to meet the very first recipient of the Martha Patterson Scholarship. His name is Caleb. He is 19 years old, with calloused hands and work boots that looked just like mine did 40 years ago. He told me that without the scholarship, he would have had to drop out and work at a fast food joint to support his sick mother. He looked me in the eye, shook my hand, with a grip like iron, and promised me he would not waste a single penny. In that handshake, I felt more connection than I had felt with Brandon in the last decade. It made me realize that legacy isn't about passing down a last name or a bank account. It is about passing down values. It is about lighting a fire in someone else. Brandon wanted my money to buy status. Caleb needed my money to buy a future. The difference is everything. I spent the afternoon watching Caleb work on a diesel engine. I saw the focus in his eyes, the respect for the machine, the pride in a job well done. I saw the ghost of the son I wished I had, and the spirit of the man I used to be. It did not make me sad. It made me proud. It confirmed that I made the right choice. I didn't destroy my family's wealth. I just redirected it to a family that actually appreciates it. The family of hard workers, dreamers, and honest people trying to make their way in the world. So as I sit here by the fire listening to the ocean, I don't feel like a man who lost a son. I feel like a father who gained 100 new children, all of them striving, all of them grateful, all of them carrying a piece of Martha's spirit into the future. And that, my friends, is a trade I would make any day of the week. This is the lesson I want you to take away from my journey. True family is not defined by bloodlines or last names. It is defined by behavior. It is defined by mutual respect, kindness, and loyalty. We often hold on to toxic family members out of a sense of obligation or guilt, believing that we owe them our lives simply because we share a history. But history is not a handcuffs. Hank Patterson taught us that enabling a predator, even if that predator is your own child, is not an act of love. It is an act of self-destruction. The most courageous thing you can do is to draw a line in the sand and say no more. You have the right to protect your peace, your dignity, and your future, even if it means walking away from the people you raised. Because at the end of the day, you cannot save someone who is determined to drown you. So tell me honestly, do you think I was too cruel to my son? Should I have given him a second chance, or did he get exactly what he deserved? I read every single comment, so please leave your thoughts below. And if this story gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, please hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and redemption. Until next time, stay strong and never let anyone treat you like you are invisible.